Welcome to the 2022 Video Game Year in Review, a series where I look back at all the games I played over the year and discuss some of my personal favorite games, accounting for the new games that I've played. You know, this year has been very interesting and big for me, not from a game playing standpoint necessarily, but from a game design standpoint. You know, I started this series back when I played games quite frequently, and to tell you the truth, I really don't play games very much anymore. That isn't to say that I think playing games is bad, or that playing less games is more mature. I think that line of thinking is quite silly, especially when games are so important to cultural development. However, as a result, when I reflect on this year from the context of video games, what I played isn't really at the forefront of my mind anymore. So while I will discuss the games I played this year, I also want to acknowledge some of the things that have happened in just my personal life, especially regarding games. First off, in March, one of my game design professors found my YouTube channel, specifically through watching my video discussing the use of bisexuality as a game mechanic. From there, I was actually hired into a research grant to study critical thinking through video games and how players interact with complex themes in games. That research turned into a paper written by myself alongside Ahu Yolech regarding the impacts of workplace toxicity on game narrative interpretation. In October, we presented our paper at the Meaningful Play Games Conference, which was an absolutely incredible experience. Also this year, I released two separate video games. Entropius, developed alongside Jonathan Dervin, Maddie Dabb, and Rekka Campbell. And I also developed and released Birdfeeder, developed alongside Alex Mojado. Game design is such a varied medium, and I love how different both of these games are. One is a visual novel with role-playing elements, while the other is a high-score-based stealth game inspired by arcade game design. Both of these games are free and available to play on itch.io. I've put a link to both of the games in the description if you'd like to play them. This year was also a year that I publicly came out as transgender. While I had come out to some of my closer friends before then, this was the year where I decided not to look back and just fully transition. And I have to say, transitioning has made my life so much better. I feel happier nowadays, more motivated to socially engage, make relationships, and spend time with people, and also to create things. You know, before I transitioned, I was relatively introverted, but I think that introversion was rooted in my self-constrained identity. Now that I have foregone that constraints and come out, I've realized just how much energy I get from actually being around people. My social battery works opposite the way that most people do. That is to say that I'm happiest when I'm around people and when I'm talking with people. I may still be socially awkward, well, very socially awkward, but I still just love being around people and talking through the nights, and that has been a change that I've noticed largely since transitioning. And I guess I also did play some games this year. This year, in full, I only played through a grand total of 2 games, those being To the Moon and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna, the Golden Country. And one of those is arguably a DLC, as opposed to a full game, though I think I'm justified in calling Torna a standalone game at this point. And, whoa, both of these games are fantastic. I love the non-linear narrative of To the Moon, and the deeply personal characters of Torna. I love that feeling when you're playing a game and you recognize that it's a revolutionary piece of media. I feel that way about both of these games. They're absolutely incredible and groundbreaking titles. And while I started the game back in 2021, I did also end up finishing Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity earlier this year. And yes, that will take this channel full circle, because that was the first game I talked about. And I'll admit, I like to think I look a lot happier than I did back then. I certainly look a lot different than I looked back then in that video. And Age of Calamity is a perfect example of the value of narrative structure over actual story details. Structurally, Age of Calamity is near perfect. The narrative arc is really well paced, and the cutscenes and story elements are very nicely balanced within the larger gameplay elements. Playing the game is so exciting because the pacing really is just that good. When the first Hyrule Warriors felt a bit disconnected and chaotic, Age of Calamity is very focused in its presentation, which really elevates the whole experience. So, even though I agree with many people online that the story doesn't quite go in the best direction, I still praise the game as a high-quality narrative experience. Then, also this year, I realized that I didn't really finish Dragon Quest XI. That's depending on who you ask, that is, as the game does have a very lengthy third act, which is technically post-game, but also doesn't really feel much like post-game. I'd started the third act a while ago, but either forgot about it or just moved on entirely, but I'm glad this year that I decided to go back because I really like that third act. It's very free form, which gives the player time to really engage with the world as this open space as opposed to just a series of levels and areas. The third act also expands on the lore and mythos of the world in a very interesting way. And yeah, that final boss, the true final boss, is tough. Like, really tough. It took me a decent bit to finally win that fight, but it was very satisfying when I got through it. I know that many people dislike the ending of Act 3 with how it treats some certain prior narrative elements, but I think it's a beautiful way to end the game. After the end of Act 2, I felt like I was missing the return journey and Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, an arc that the game very closely follows. Act 3 brings a sense of finality to that arc that wasn't really there beforehand, and I think it gives the party a very satisfying end after their journey together through Erdrea. And speaking of JRPGs, another big one came out this year. Not only that, but one from one of my favorite series out there, Xenoblade Chronicles. I was so excited when Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was revealed in February. The Xenoblade games are able to explore such complex themes in a way that's both epic and intimate. Xenoblade is willing to engage its audience and provide a thoughtful discussion of many important topics. At this point, I've played Xenoblade 3 for around 20 or so hours, and in that time, I focused mostly on completing side quests. Not out of obligation to avoid grinding, but because the side quests in this game are so incredibly well thought out. Especially compared to other Xenoblade games, the number of quests has been significantly reduced, but each has become more engaging and worthwhile. None of these feel like filler, they all feel very important to the game, characters, and overarching narrative. While I'm not very far into the game, I've had a great time playing, and I look forward to continuing that journey. Now, the last game that I think is important to talk about playing this year is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Back when I lived in Brazil, my mom was addicted to Mario Kart Wii. My brother and I would go to bed and we would hear my mom turn on the TV to play Mario Karts. Every night we'd hear Charles Martinet's voice screaming, "Mario Kart Wii! Woohoo!" Because my mom always forgot to turn down the volume before turning on the Wii. This was the year that my mom got re-addicted to Mario Kart, this time with Mario Kart 8 as opposed to Mario Kart Wii. So every time I've gone home, I've spent a decent bit of time playing Mario Kart with her. And there is actually one other game I did play for just a little bit. I played Life is Strange 2 a bit with my girlfriend. I've only finished chapter 1, but wow, it's very good. It deliberately subverts your expectations based off of previous games and delivers a message that feels all too relevant and scary. Games, like literature, allow the player to empathize with experiences outside of their own. I think this game is really successful with that. Playing the game, I think players may genuinely begin to empathize with and understand Sean and Daniel's experience, which are indicative of a greater systemic issue. And yeah, that's it. That is all the games I played this year. That's 7 games total for this entire year, I think. My high school self would be shocked by that, but that is okay. My life is very different now than it was then, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm actually incredibly happy right now, and I have some of the strongest relationships I've ever had at the moment. So even though I'm playing games much less now, I'm okay with that. Though so many great games do release nowadays from some incredibly talented indie and AAA studios. These games are not only great, but also incredibly important, which sometimes makes me sad that I don't have the chance to play all of them because they are such important and well thought out pieces of media. But I think that's okay too. Now, in previous years, this is when I would break down a top 10 list of my favorite games of all time, but after a lot of thought, I feel like this is a very rigid way to talk about games. So instead, I just want to talk about some of the games that are most important to me personally for a variety of reasons. First off, we can talk about Okami. Having never really been able to engage with 3D Zelda games, I was largely drawn to Okami because of the gorgeous artwork and this promise of a compelling story. I can't say that I was immediately hooked, but I did fall in love pretty quickly, largely because of the charming characters and the interesting world. Isun is very cute, and I love them so much. I love the way that the game explores this feeling of dread, with the townspeople refusing to accept a bad fate as reality, leading to this very grim experience. The second half is incredibly compelling, elevating the experience as a whole. Okami really moved me through this somewhat depressing nature and Amaterasu's ability to overcome it and bring hope in the midst of that, negativity. The more I have studied game design, the more interested I've been in narrative design and how narrative design functions within a game, allowing for emergent possibilities based off of player agency. While Life is Strange is an incredibly embedded narrative experience, it enables the player to carry legitimate agency in the world that feels meaningful and impactful. The game aptly uses a metaphor of a butterfly to represent the butterfly effect, which is an accurate depiction of the game narrative. The way the player engages with the world is absolutely impactful to the game narrative, or at least how the player will interpret that narrative. Even when the response is not immediate, everything has a way of following through and making some sort of impact. This brings so much weight to the story and creates a strong empathetic link between the player and Max, which makes some of the game's climactic moments really resonate. It's a phenomenal narrative experience, and one that accurately demonstrates that games don't need to be fun to be impactful and worthwhile. On the note of Life is Strange Before the Storm made a tremendous impact on me as well. This is the first game in the series to really be explicit with its queer representation, and that personally struck me. While there are flaws with the representation in the game, I feel really happy and validated by the queer love. Games can and should be a means for real-world change, and that means that we have to be extremely intentional with our meaningful representation, as by seeing legitimate and strong representation in media, those marginalized individuals who are represented become more normalized within society. Thus, good representation actually creates a meaningful impact in the world, and I think Life is Strange Before the Storm is a good step in that right direction to that meaningful representation. And at the same time, not every game has to be emotionally complex to be exciting and meaningful. Super Mario Odyssey is one of those games that simply instills this incredible sense of joy in the player. It's so upbeat and exciting and well-paced, with so many wonderful and diverse kingdoms to explore that it's hard not to feel overwhelmed with happiness when playing. Even now, I'm still continuously humming to the music from Super Mario Odyssey. In the winter, I tend to hum the Snow Kingdom's underground theme quite a bit. It's one of the coziest winter levels. The game sparked just so much excitement for me, and that excitement, I think, is extremely valuable within society. Just as much as there's a time and a place to engage with very complex and often somber themes, it's the time to smile and feel an overwhelming excitement. Moving on, I think the best way I can describe Dragon Quest XI is like a storybook, read to you just as you go to bed. I think Tim Rogers said something like that too. An epic depiction of the hero's journey set between incredibly charming landscapes with a phenomenal cast of characters. I love these characters so much because they really radiate the essence of a ragtag team of people working together for the greater good. The dialogue is so conversational and cozy, making the relationships between the characters feel very special. When playing Dragon Quest XI, I felt very inspired that there was always a chance for a meaningful relationship with someone you don't really know yet. That relationship can be one of the closest you've ever had. This story, this world, these characters are so well balanced and wonderful to engage with. Now, another JRPG, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, made me feel a very similar way. When I bought the game in 2018, I had never really played a JRPG before. I hadn't even heard of the Xenoblade series, but this trailer seemed too big and epic that I started to feel very intrigued. Back then, I bought a lot of games. Like, a lot. And though it took me a few months after launch to buy the game, I eventually bought it on sale, taking a complete gamble on it. And, well, I didn't really like it at first. My first playthrough, I hit a point where I didn't think I would ever finish the game because I was so under-leveled, frustrated, and didn't understand how to play. But the scale of the world and the really interesting opening cutscenes made enough of an impression on me that after setting the game down for a few months, I did end up picking it up and finishing it, and I really liked the ending. I really liked how the game finished. And so a few years later, I decided to finish the game again. The second playthrough is when the game really clicked for me. I loved the exploration of the destructive nature of godlike power and became very emotionally attached to the characters. I had not, to that point, played a game of that length, so having that time allowed the characters to make a unique and strong impact. And now this is like my favorite game series of all time, so I'm glad I took a chance on the game. I have a whole video up on this channel explaining my thoughts a bit more. If you want to check that out, I also have a few other videos digging deeper into some of the games I'm talking about. If you're interested, you can check those out on my channel. But naturally, having learned to love the second Xenoblade game, I decided to play the first. And yeah, this one is incredible too. While the second game explored the destructive nature of power on those with power, the first game explores the opposite, the destructive nature of power on those who are powerless. The game is incredibly thoughtful with its handling of characters, leading to many strong emotional beats while still maintaining this really solid pacing. The game also knows when to ramp things up and when to slow down, ensuring that each beat lands. It's also a remarkable landmark in game atmosphere. The Dual Titan setting is very overwhelming, reinforcing the player's minuscule size and power in the world, which in turn reinforces this concept of powerlessness. It's a really beautiful game with very engaging mechanics and setting. On that note, and to wrap up discussing Xenoblade games in this video, I understand that many people will refer to Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna, the Golden Country, as DLC, because it is technically literally DLC, but it's a very unique DLC in that it's heavily focused on its own unique story, and it's quite a compelling one. By using some characters from the base game within a new context, the game successfully builds in the world of Xenoblade 2 retroactively. I also like the somewhat smaller landscapes, which makes the game more dense and accessible. In the main games, the spaces can be so large that they become overwhelming, but here, everything is still large but also much more navigable. You can pretty easily get through every corner of the world through side quests or just exploration, which helps keep the experience constrained in very effective ways. And it is quite a sad experience too. I admired the focused, constrained nature of the game, and I think that constraint helped make the experience feel full and unique, despite only being DLC. Now, there are many people who are probably more qualified to talk about Undertale than I am, but I can say that it is the most effective subversion of expectations I've ever experienced in a game. The most subverted my expectations have ever been. And using that to force a player to completely rethink the experience and how the game plays, I'm just in awe of how successful Toby Fox was at conveying that narrative. The way I felt towards the end of the game was an experience I had not yet had in a video game before, and I got caught up in all of the lore. It reminded me in a lot of ways of how excited I was to figure out all the mysteries in Gravity Falls back in the day. I would always pursue forums and YouTube videos to try to really understand everything and make theories and predictions. That feeling of excitement over lore and mystery is a rare one, and I'm honestly just happy that Undertale allowed me to feel that way again. Now, in many ways, Gris is the sort of game I really want to make. Through abstraction, Nomada Studio creates a pretty whole, nuanced, and defined exploration of emotion and depression, stripping back any fantasy elements, dialogue, or wacky characterizations. The game's exploration of themes feels very encompassing and focused. The abstract imagery is so vivid and successfully reflects the game narrative and themes. Additionally, the dynamic camera is able to reinforce loneliness by zooming out, or feelings of anxiety and intimacy by zooming in, not knowing what's around you, or focusing particularly on just one thing. The lack of dialogue keeps the game focused and emotional, relying on space to convey feeling. It's a landmark example of spatial storytelling, and a game that everybody should experience. Speaking of games everyone should experience, Celeste. Now, I'm trans, you're trans, maybe. So, of course I love Celeste, but it's not just because I'm trans, it's because the game is incredible. A thoughtful discussion of anxiety alongside a brutally difficult and exciting platformer. It's just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. The difficulty reinforces themes of anxiety while motivating the player that they are capable. You can do this. A message that echoes through every minute of the game, providing a sense of confidence and assurance that combats that anxiety. Madeline is climbing to prove she is capable, and every failure to overcome an obstacle isn't defeat. It's a reflection of the possibility of failure, one which will assuredly be overcome as the player makes the way to the top of the mountain. I remember when Breath of the Wild was first revealed. I don't think I have ever been that excited for a game before. I loved the ambiance and the visuals. It was pretty much immediately striking, and as more story content was revealed through the following trailers, I remember that feeling that the game was about to be one of those defining game experiences permeating every thought I had. Breath of the Wild is just so intelligent with how it handles open world design, framing the narrative in a way that justifies exploration while still maintaining that sense of anticipation for the more embedded narrative beats. It's one of those games where just meandering around the landscapes and villages is as exciting as any particular fights or combat encounter, just in a different way. Every element is constantly engaging, and the game is able to emphasize the scope of the world in so many clever ways that makes exploration feel significant. Like, you've really conquered something big, but then the game knows when to blow you away in a calm, ambient piano medley, a gust of wind breezing by you. The world feels so natural and wonderful. Breath of the Wild is just genuinely awe-inspiring. I've played a lot of great games in my life, but perhaps the most impactful game in my life was the first I ever played, Super Mario Galaxy. Galaxy became a way for me to connect with some of my earliest friends when I was living abroad in Brazil. I was still very young and somewhat intimidated by living in a place with people who had had such a drastically different life and cultural experience, but Super Mario Galaxy happened to become a colossal point of conversation for myself and many others, which helped me make connections despite being overwhelmed by this new place. And though many of those relationships formed from talking about Galaxy, they did not become dependent on the game either. I still remember those fun, whimsical childhood adventures with those friends. It's so strange how distant those experiences are to myself now. 15 years and a gender transition later, I hardly feel connected to that time. When I think about those memories that are quite fond and important to me, I sometimes struggle to actually ground myself into those experiences that I had. I feel like I'm watching a kid who I know to be myself, but one who hardly even seems like me. I think there's something really beautiful about that. I don't like dwelling in the past, but it's nice to be able to look back at those experiences that really meant something to me. Okay, got a bit sidetracked. I was talking about Galaxy, wasn't I? Well, that's how the game makes me feel. I begin to feel nostalgic towards a time where I would talk with those friends and get excited over every galaxy, every star, every planet, every moment, every experience. Galaxy is the sort of game that feels incredibly personal to me, and it always will, and I'm very grateful for those experiences. Lastly, I want to talk about Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley came to me at a time where I was really struggling with my own identity and emotions. When I was in high school, I was at an emotional low, in part due to my gender dysphoria, but also because I felt so conflicted about my place in the world. I was ready to move on. I felt that I was stuck in some tedious cycle, yet at the same time I felt sick because I knew so many of my friends were going to go off to colleges across the country. When I left Brazil, I still remember that sick feeling when some of my closest friends started moving back to America. I had to say goodbye to so many of the people who had helped me through a really weird time. The group of people that made things much less scary and intimidating. They were all going away, and I felt left behind in many ways. I knew that some of those feelings in high school were going to come back when more of my friends went away, especially as I spent a lot of time with some people in grades above me. Stardew Valley was able to accomplish two things. It gave me an escape, one where I could have some control over how I identified and how I organized and maintained my life. I related to the player character's radical shift away from a mundane setting into something remarkably different and new. I was ready for that myself. And then Citizens of Pelican Town, being so intricate and well written, made me feel confident that I would not be alone. Stardew Valley succeeds in presenting characters with some meaningful depth, bringing about some impactful character moments where the player character grows closer to each citizens. Those moments made a lasting impression on me. Stardew Valley is special, a timeless game that only progresses forward. When I play the game now, I'm not only playing the same game that I had previously played, I'm continuing that same story with the same farm and the same individual. Games can speak to the human ability to empathize, and Stardew Valley certainly spoke to mine, because my mental health has always been somewhat of a challenge. I think that's inevitable for anyone who lives with gender dysphoria before coming out. I had some rough experience that definitely left a negative impact on me, but I think looking back, I wouldn't change those experiences at all. Sure, they made me miserable, but at the same time, having that context, I think, has enabled me to actually be happy nowadays. This past year especially, I've been able to reconcile a lot of those bad experiences and times with poor mental health and really start to feel a general happiness that I hadn't felt before. When I went to the Meaningful Play conference, the first keynote was from Carrie Heater, who said, "In the game of life, the person who has the most meaningful experiences wins." That quote has stuck with me since then because, I've had a lot of meaningful experiences recently. This year I've been intentional to take every opportunity I can spend with people. No matter what I had planned for the day, if there's some opportunity for a meaningful conversation with someone I genuinely care about, I'm going to take it. And that willingness to engage with people has led to some of the most incredible moments in my recent memory. And I think that's played a large part in my happiness nowadays. The relationships I have now are some of the most impactful I've had in my life. Every day with them is a meaningful experience in itself. On this channel, I used to make a lot of videos about specific games, but those sorts of videos haven't really come out in this year in favor of more broad and general topics. And the truth of the matter is, I haven't made those videos because I haven't been playing through many games, and I haven't been playing through many games because I've been spending so much time with people. Some nights I'll get talking with friends, and that conversation will go on for hours. I remember recently staying up till 6 in the morning with a friend while performing in a show recently. We had a call time the next day at 1 in the afternoon, and we got to bed at 6. We were so tired, but I don't think either of us regretted that night because our conversation was really, I think, meaningful to the both of us. I really don't know what the future looks like, and I don't want to either. I've been intentional to focus on the specific moments in which I am living, not worrying about the past or the future, just embrace the specific time I am experiencing right now. I'm beginning to wonder if I'm currently living in the time that I will look back to as one of the best times of my life. I feel this newfound tenacity for living and engaging with people that has really made me excited for every single day, and that very thought makes me emotional because I know that there was the longest time in my life where I felt nothing like that. A time when I felt generally quite sad. To think about how things have changed in my life is just... it's a lot to process. And I feel very comfortable saying that publicly because it's an important thing to talk about. If there's anyone out there who is feeling poorly, feeling stuck, eager to move on, if your mental health has been down, just know that that's a shared feeling, and it's also a temporary feeling. You are not alone. And I encourage everyone to be open about those feelings to whoever you feel most comfortable talking to. You are not ignored, you are not unseen, you are not unheard. I hear you. I also talk about this because experience impacts identity, and identity defines what we make and what we consume and how we feel about those things. I always thought of this channel as a library of my evolving thoughts regarding certain topics in order to promote discussion or thoughts. But if those are my thoughts that I'm sharing, it's also important for me to share my own identity and emotions. And the funny thing is, looking back through the channel, I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I shared my thoughts evolved, and I've gone from a pretty low point in my life to a point where I feel both happy and comfortable. I've changed a lot since that Age of Calamity demo impression. I don't think the same way I used to. I don't engage with things the same way I did. I don't even identify the same way I did back then. Starting this channel, I knew that I would evolve, and I wanted to give myself room to do so. And here I am now, and I've been able to document that evolution in my life. And through that, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for listening to me through a lot of weird times. I know I don't have a large audience, but I'm genuinely grateful for everyone who has taken the time to engage with these videos. I hope that I've been able to say something meaningful and valuable to you, and I hope that in the future I may continue to do so. I will talk to you again very soon. Farewell.